Hello, everyone. We are here to present to you our case study, 500 English Sentences for the MBA 663 Negotiation. My name is Matthew Ream,
I'm Emmanuel.
I'm Lay.
and we'll be discussing our case study here. So for the content of this presentation, we're first going to go over and summarize the 500 English Sentences case study, discuss the dilemma of the situation, uh, discuss the situation within the concepts and principles that we've learned in the negotiation class, thus analyze that from that um, findings, and then present to you our recommendation of the situation as well as any conclusion and takeaways from this case study. So to summarize the 500 English Sentences case study, the primary person in the story is Scott, who is a young American from the United States who is teaching in Japan through the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program. He originally became interested in Japan through karate, and then was introduced to the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program during his senior year of college. At first, when he went over to Japan, he was in a small community at Naka High School and experienced challenges in the community through the language barrier that he had. But with his desire to learn and be as involved as possible, he overcame those challenges and became quite the popular member in the community. And this was also through his mentorship that he had with Mr. Honda, who was a well-respected teacher at the school. Um, After his first year in the JET program, he asked to transfer to the prefecture's capital city so his girlfriend could find a job upon moving to Japan. And coincidentally, his mentor, Mr. Honda from Naka High School, also transferred to Nishi High School as well with him, which was a much more competitive school as they were focused on going to advanced schools after graduation. And in this school, he was asked to teach out of the 500 English Sentences textbook, uh, which he chose not to, as he believed it was, vastly out of date, and was successful still throughout with that, without doing that. However, later on in the year, he was notified of his department's opportunity to uh, help republish the 500 English Sentences textbook upon Mr. Honda telling him so. However, this was with very short notice, and he, was surprised about it, but decided, put his whole heart into it and provided thorough recommendations for it within a few days. But little did Scott know that this was actually the final copy that he was given and not the original. And they decided not to go with any of his recommendations, in light of them not wanting to change their vision of it, as well as also, they had expected him to okay it, and they, didn't necessarily agree with Scott's recommendations. Mr. Honda had asked him to sign the revised version for republication as a part of him approving of it, but he really did not want to do this because he didn't agree with it. So ultimately, if you would go to the next slide, please. He has to decide whether or not he would provide his recommendation, despite it compromising his beliefs, but then, going along with cultural expectations, or should he decide to prioritize his beliefs and contrast those cultural beliefs, those cultural expectations. So ultimately, the question is, what should Scott do given this short notice decision of whether or not he should sign the republication of 500 English Sentences?
Okay, so there's some technical difficulties. Uh, but we'll talk really quickly about some of the negotiation principles that we learned throughout the class and how it relates to Scott's negotiation and his own predicaments here. So one of the things that we learned throughout the class and through the textbooks is to bargain over interest rather than positions. And so what Scott's position here is to not sign the document or to sign the revision. But it's important for him to look at some of his interests and why he would or would not sign the revision. And one of his is his reputation as a good and professional English teacher, right? He does not want his name on a document and a textbook that's not, very professional, that has mistakes here and there. The other thing that was really important to Scott in that text is the students actually learning English language the right way. That's one of his interests. But something else to consider is the students have been learning English language for a long time. And even though that's the primary book they use, the 500 English sentences, it's not the only book that they use. So it's important to think about that as well. The third thing is Scott's ability to stay in Japan and work and continue to improve his karate skills. It's really important to him. He wants to be out there. He wants to, be in the country because he loves karate. Another thing that's important is working in a big city where his girlfriend could also work, and it has to be in a big city, and that's the situation he is in right now. He's in a big city. His girlfriend can come there, and she can get a job. The other thing that's important to note in this negotiation, that's one of the principles or concepts that we talked about, is relationships and negotiation. um, it's really important for Scott to think about this because the resolution of this particular issue has implications on his future in Japan, right? He wants to keep his job in a big city, but it's important to know that when people disagree on issues, sometimes the relationship never gets mended, and when those things don't go away, then it puts the negotiation at risk, right? So Scott not endorsing the text, puts Mr. Honda in a very embarrassing situation with the Board of Education. It seems like he cannot control his employee, because what reason would he have for Scott not signing it, especially when they wanted to sign it? And so you put Mr. Honda in that kind of situation. Mr. Honda may never want to work with Scott again in the future, which then again Scott loses all the other things that he wants to do, like live in Japan and would live in a big city and learn karate and have his girlfriend come meet him. Uh, and this is a primary example of a cross-cultural negotiation, right? Scott is American. He grew up in the United States. He's in Japan working with a Japanese boss that's making a demand. And if you all the other staff, there's a they don't mind what Mr. Honda is doing because that's what they're used to. They're used to this collective culture and doing things together. On the other hand, Mr. Scott is an American, and there's a more individualist culture in the United States. In Japan, another thing to note is bosses are respected and they're not meant to be questioned. Whereas in the U.S., there is a less far distance between employees and their superiors, so there can be a little bit of asking questions and disagreeing a little bit. In Japan, that's not so. And so in negotiations is something that you need to take into consideration, and Scott really has to think about this. And he also needs to think about his partner, right? He has to draw the line somewhere. Should he accept and sign the republished version of that 500 English sentences and stay there and work and maybe have them make some concessions and he makes some concessions, just sign it and fine with that? Or should he just stick with his beliefs and say, here's where I draw the line. If we're not going to make these corrections, I'm not going to put my name to it and I'm going to go back to the United States. He needs to draw the line somewhere.
Hello, hi guys. I will take a deep overview of the analysis and the conclusion section. So here is how the couple of ways that the culture influenced the negotiations. First of all is the definition of negotiation. So in the US, Americans tend to view the negotiation as a competitive process, while in the Japanese culture, they tend to view the negotiation as an opportunity of building long-term relationship as well as sharing the informations. So in this case, the relationship is more defined in this negotiation. Second, the selection of the negotiators. In this case, Scott and his boss, Mr. Honda, are more likely are the trusted associates rather than experts. And in Japanese culture, outbidding a deal is more cares about who you are rather than what you can do. And in the negotiation part, Japanese culture are more go with the indirect way. Such for instance, if some Japanese said, "Oh, I'll think about it," well, this basically means no, not at all. So, and the time sensitivities in this case is quite intense as well, because the book needs to be printed as soon as possible. So the Scott has less time to make the decision, and he's kind of in rush to get a decision and result. So, and the group and individual, as the manual talked about earlier, so I will not talk about this in this section, and then we can move to the next one. So here are a couple of the recommendations that we can give. So first of all, when we think about the cross-cultural negotiation, do we really need to follow the quotes when in Rome, do as the Romans do? Well, it makes sense in some content, but this is not enough to have to get the best deal during the cross-cultural negotiation. So moderate adoption is the best way to manage a cross-cultural negotiation. In this case, as we understand, moderate means you adopt the culture in some content as well as not following your own interest. So in this case, Scott must follow the Japanese culture and understand the differences between the Japanese culture and the American cultures. For instance, in Japan, they follow the jiri violation value, which is defined as to serve one's superiors with a self-sacrificing devotion, whereas in the US, they're more towards the self-serving bias. So in this content, Scott should more likely to compromising and sacrifice a little bit to adopt himself into the Japanese culture. However, Scott should not lose all of his interest in terms of his individualism as American. This is why we recommend Scott sign the documents on the condition that he also gets a longer contract, because he wants to stay in Japan, and his revision will be adopted on the next publications to recover his reputations. And the last is the conclusion and the takeaways. So first of all is the culture is a group level phenomenon that we must realize that people in one group share same values, beliefs, and behavioral expectations, as well as people. This is why people from different cultures negotiate differently, and we must understand the differences between those cultures before we negotiating with them. And the third, the culture has important effects on several aspects of negotiation, such as the outcomes, the process, the information exchange, and so on. And the last but not least, the moderate adoption. This is probably, the moderate adoption is more effective than doing as the Romans do. So in this case, negotiators need to take the culture differences into account when they negotiate, but just not accept it and simply following the culture of others. So, and that's all what we conclude. Thank you.